by a name or a face. We fight like brothers in a war with the dark elf race. In a dying age.
Alrighty. Good evening, good morning, good night, wherever you happen to be. I'm Jonathan Albin, and this is NycosRPG, and this is Creative Differences, where we talk about elements of roleplay games and do a kind of a compare and contrast between the origins of roleplay, from which I started 50 years ago, to the present. And we're going to today talk about what are the various kinds of game masters. And so the question that I'm asking is, who is behind your game shield? What kind of a game master do you have? And I'm going to give some examples, and they are not in any particular chronological order. I basically built the list stream of consciousness style, and am going to be looking at them little by little and kind of determining what kind of a game master you have and what kind of a game master I am. And I will later do something called the evolution of a game master, where I talk about the many steps that it takes to go from a initiate, a beginning game master, all the way through to the veterans and beyond. And even I'll talk about those places where some people get hung up and stuck in their development as a storyteller. But I'm also going to be looking at it from the standpoint of, but I'm not going to be doing that series today. I'm not going to be talking about the evolution, because all of us, every game master out there, goes through the evolution in one order or another. But today we're going to talk about what kind of a game master you are. What kind of game master does your group have? And if you're watching and are part of this, feel free to leave comments in the chat box if you're verified viewer of Twitch. If not, the system will show you how to go ahead and get verified. I believe it's either a phone number or a verified email account. Either one of those should work, or in some cases it takes both. I don't recall. I think I only set it up for the email. But the gist of today's show is to talk about game mastery and the types of game masters there are. And it really doesn't have as much to do with where you are in the process of GMing. It has everything to do with the concept of what you like to run, what you prefer to run. I've got an issue with the tilt of my camera being a bit askew. Alrighty. Oh, I see what I was doing there. I see what I did there. There's a parallel line behind me I can work off of. There we go. So I feel like I'm a bit of a bat cave with a slight angle to the set. So if that's disconcerting, trust me, not everything is sliding to the right like it appears here, but instead it's simply a perspective issue, and I'm trying to line up with the top of the screen. But anyway, that's all stuff behind the curtain. Never ignore the man behind the curtain. Look at the guy who's talking to you right now. Okay, so we are going to be talking about these different kinds of game masters, and as I said, they're not in any particular order, just the way they kind of fell out of my brain. At some point, perhaps I will graduate them if that's something you'd like me to do. If you've got any concepts you'd like for me to cover, feel free to post that in the comments section here on Twitch, and or, of course, on the YouTube channel, because this will be transferred over there in a few hours after we get done with the show. But the question is, what kind of a game master are you? What kind of storyteller are you? And what is your wheelhouse? So I'm going to start off right at the top, and that is the concept of the serial one-shot. The serial one-shot is what it sounds like. They are a series of single events that are only associated because the same storyteller is telling the story. These serial one-shots don't tend to have any link from one to the next. You as a game master have the idea for running an adventure, and once you've presented the story as you intended, that one is done, and you move on to the next one. And perhaps it's the same characters, perhaps not. Perhaps it's a variance in the progression or advancement of the personas that you characters that you want in the game. But the idea here is that a serial one shot literally means that you tell new stories with each new beginning. Sometimes, of course, a one shot, as I mentioned in a previous video, sometimes a one shot isn't truly a single episode, one shot being a single story, and that might take 2 or 3 or like a mini series kind of an event. But generally speaking, you're telling one story from beginning to end of that arc, and then you're closing the book on it, so to speak. The serial one shot is I guess I would call it a optimal choice if your play group is not stable. If you do not have a consistent games group week over week, you don't have a recognized, dependable time period, whether it be once a week, once a month, every other week, every third Tuesday, or whatever. When they're serialized like that, when you have a schedule, you can move on to other types of stories because the player continuity can be maintained. But if you're switching from Fridays to Saturdays and then once on a Tuesday and maybe for a different group of people on Saturday, that broken up scheduling really fits the serial one-shot game master type. Generally, it's a front-loaded situation, and by that I mean the game master has to do a lot of intense reading and creation and analysis before the session starts, because once the story's going, it's only got the one episode or one series, and it's completed. So perhaps that means you have to front load a lot of SRCs. SPCs, serial personas, SRPs? Yeah. Story. SNPs. Story non-enjoined personalities or personas. SNPs. I've got to get my acronyms down. This is all relatively new because the NycosRPG books aren't available to everybody yet. So the standard, what you would call a non-player character in a more standard role-play game, would equate to what are called fundamentally window dressing persona, or WDPs, in the Nycos system. The WDs are generally flat, dimensionless, purpose-driven encounters, and generally they're perfunctory. There's something that a storyteller almost is required to do as part of any sectionized or what's the word I'm looking for? Compartmentalized adventure. You're going to bring out the standard bartender, the standard barkeep, the standard waitress, the standard squire, or whatever. These are going to be the cookie cutters that you need to have to fill the checklists of NPCs. And if you are a serial one-shot game master, you may even have the same encounter as initial connection. So, for example, the classic trope of you're in this bar, and that you're in a bar leads to certain archetypical or stereotypical personalities that you would expect to run into in those places. So the storyteller in a serial one-shot is not looking for depth, because there is no connection between episode 1 and, say, episode 20. Again, unless it's a serialized group of episodes, 1, 2, 3, or whatever in the series. But generally speaking, a one-shot doesn't require any depth to the persona you engage with. Now, if you have a differing opinion on that, I'd love to hear your take on it. But if you're not if you're introducing the same players but a different locale, then there's no reason to understand or get nuanced on the background or the intention of the barkeep or the young lady who's batting her eyes from the corner. There's no reason for that to become a deeper than flat character because you don't have enough time. The one downside to the serial one-shots is that, generally speaking, since the plot is moving from point A to point B, and that's the end of the story, then there's no continuity connection from one to the next. Now, there may be other ways to do that, but in those we'll get to the variances that might feel like serial one-shots, but the serial one-shots truly are disjointed. They're not connected one to the next in any kind of a fashion. And that kind of a game master, as I said, is usually hit or miss. Usually, if a retail store is hosting an event and it's only a periodic, once a month thing, then generally speaking, it'll be a serial one-shot game master that they're looking for. So the plus side is there is potentially, in terms of continuity and income, the serial one-shot's got an advantage because everyone knows that when the story's over, you're done, and so therefore they're not going to be concerned with whether or not they're going to be forking out dough over a longer period of time. If they do hire you, you're being hired for that one event. And if you have a large enough circle of access, serial one-shots is certainly a way to go. It also tends to fit players who don't have the stability. So, for example, let's say you've got a rather large games group, a 6 or 8 or 10 players who regularly play in your games, but they don't all make it every week. Then the serial one-shot generally is a great way to go because you run with whoever's there, whichever persona that they've, scheduled to run or whatever, and then at the end of that series, those characters are out of the picture again. So that your players, if they're able to go, can usually commit to the 1, 2, or maybe even 3 sessions of the serial one-shot. Moving from that to the other, realize that a lot of these characteristics will seem to cross over. I'm going to go, even though I'm going to go with them in the order that I've written them down here, but you'll see that some of them more align with the serial one-shot than they do with the others, and I'll kind of try to touch on that as I get to them. And again, if you're watching this and want to make a comment, feel free to send me a message in the stream chat. I respond to that, and if not, I will definitely reach out to you afterwards if you leave a comment. So, and whether that's here or on YouTube, I'm pretty quick at responding to both. So the next kind of a game master, the next kind of a storyteller you might have behind your shield is a chronicler of the cast. He builds chronicles of the cast, and this is almost in some ways the opposite of a serial one-shot. This person is very interested in the background and the personas of the characters that play in his stories, because that backstory helps to build his future. He's establishing the facts of the case with the background of the personas and moving forward down their lines. So generally a chronicler style of game master is going to keep pretty extensive notes on the personas in his game, what players bring to the table or what he's going to respond to. And so each week he's going to be checking to see whether or not there was a particular advancement that a player was wanting to pursue with his character in order to make it fit the story. Now, some game masters, especially the serial one-shots, don't spend a lot of time looking into the personas at all, other than to make sure they fit the minimum requirements for the event. But he's not going to be interested or have the capacity to want to link the backstories into his serials, because the serial adventures really don't care who you are. You are a plug being plugged into the story, and therefore he's going to be sculpting it so that you'll fit into the one-shot story. Chroniclers, on the other hand, will do very, very much reverse integration. So he will talk to the players. More than likely, a chronicler will want to have a session 0, not to set the tone for the campaign, as many do, but instead to ensure that the backstories are coherent and cohesive, so that there's a way to link the players together. Chroniclers actually are interested in the what happens and when of things, so they're going to be tracking the advancement of each character in the story to make sure that they're progressing as the players decide to go, because he's recording in advance sort of the course by which the players can reach those objectives. And this is an integrated game master, so generally chroniclers are going to run things like the hero's path or the pilgrim's path or some other of the dynamic storylines that require player interaction. And by doing so, these chronicle game masters are actually endeavoring to make the game as smooth towards the player objectives as he can, and his own story be damned. In other words, he's not creating a through line necessarily. Most chroniclers really can't, because the players do have agendas that adjust and morph over time, and being sensitive to what the players need for their advancement in the game, he's going to alter the course to make it more palatable for the group. Now, there's some challenges to the chroniclers through line, and that is that the chroniclers have to try to maintain connections with all players, but not all players are going to be necessarily aggressive with their backstories and aggressive with what they're trying to accomplish. And so if the communications pathway isn't directly gelling, it's quite possible for a game master who is running a Chronicles type of campaign can get lost. And by that I mean he can fall prey to a particularly effective alpha personality. And I'm not one who tries to define my players in terms of alphas or this category or that category, but instead the person that is a chronicler does need to. He needs to be on top of where the personas are going, and this therefore lends this kind of storyteller into the position of acquiescing to the more powerful personalities. If I ask a question of 4 players and only one has a clear answer, it's relatively easy to fall prey to following that one storyline, and that generally is possibly one of the weakest themes of a game master, is that he's acquiescing to the stronger personality. Now, don't get me wrong, you can have a very strong chronicler game master who actually does manage to negotiate that thread danger, but it does sometimes take a considerable amount of effort to draw out from the players what it is they are wanting to do, especially if they are from the older generation of players or they have a more story-driven mindset. They tend to find ways to make their persona merge into the fast lane, so to speak. They'll get advancement, but they won't be on the course that they want to pursue, and therefore they will slowly alter their path so that they will merge onto a single fast lane, so to speak. And a Chronicles game master can run into troubles with that. We'll come back to them again in a minute, but let's move on. The next game master type, and I think this one may be one of the stronger of the story type game masters, is the one who is a travelogue of modules. And by that I mean he loves a good story, and he's constantly searching the internet for he's looking for one-shots per se. He's looking for mini stories that he can tell that showcase something that he wants to demonstrate to the players or wants to play through. A quick example would be a Star Trek themed story, or a Star Trek style of storytelling would be a travelogue of modules. In other words, Encounter at Farpoint Station was the first module, if you will. And then once that was done, they could break off from that storyline and pursue something completely different down a different course. But each time, the director, the storyteller, has a direction he's hoping the people will go. Now, the one thing when they go back to the other two and kind of blur this line a little bit, a serial one-shot doesn't track the chronology of the encounters. He just plays what he sees as the one-shot to run right now. And characters don't matter to him so much. He can run with whoever shows up. Chronicler definitely wants to follow the storyline of the personas, and if the persona, the most vocal or the combined will of the people, so to speak, doesn't want to go into the next module portion, a module-based game master has trouble with the Chronicles theme. He has a harder time pushing the backstory into the theme of what he has going, because he really doesn't know what it's going to be week over week. It's similar to the one-shot in that it is somewhat serialized in smaller chunks, but the check boxes of all the places he wants to take the characters is driven by that travelogue of modules. Coming next is a separate style of game mastery, and this really is something that it's how you started as a storyteller. If you as a game master came on during a promotional period for the release of a certain product, or a certain creature type became the trending story on YouTube or whatever, then you fall prey to this concept of the monster of the month. And I say monster of the month, it could be locale of the month, it could be class limitation of the month, it could be a species or race related course that he wanted to follow. But the idea here is that it's staccato in rhythm, in that a monster of the month, the most common back in the day when I was a younger game master, I know, should take out my teeth, back in my day we used to do it this way, but monster of the month as a process literally is that you're pulling out your monster man, your fiend fellow, your monstrous companion, creature catalog, whatever you want to call it, and you're literally picking and checking off as the parties engage each of them, so that you're giving a player a more rounded approach to the game, because they're seeing all of the potentials that are out there. There's always a plus and a minus to every style of game master. But the monster of the month also tends to not take into account other elements that would be necessary in other styles. So it's hard to run a monster of the month course if you're playing with a community-based group who are, endeavoring to stay in their hometown. If they are in a temperate zone, it's hard to throw them a tropical monster or a aquatic monster or a ice age monster. The monster of the month game master really is just catapulting players from one locale to the next. And there are certainly ways to do that. Sometimes the players will, go through a short wave of hand wavium as he uses the mystical powers of game master to say, you've traveled for 2 months to this location at the behest of blah blah, and now you've got the encounter with the monster. But this monster of the month is usually a dynamic environment. It's challenging. Generally, for player advancement, it's a kind of a windfall, because there's always something new to engage, and therefore experience points tend to rack up quickly in systems that use that mechanism. But unless your players actually have a big game hunter mentality, unless they have a methodology wherein they want to pursue each and every type of monster, it's kind of a difficult course to take. So now we're going to switch back to something that's more akin to the Chronicler's storyline, and that's the Railroad Engineer. And this one in many cases either is a bane or a boon depending on you as a player. You know, what kind of a game master that you have at your table can be picked from one of these by the style that you've seen. But arguably the railroad engineer, the storyboard railroad, is really one that gets the biggest negative press, I guess you'd say, in that the game master does have a story he wants to tell and will shoehorn the backgrounds of the characters to make them merge into a narrow band that he can then manipulate and control to drive the group forward through the story. Some people who are exemplary railroad engineers, you wouldn't even feel it. You wouldn't be aware that that was going on. But you would be able to see it if you are as a player. You could tell your railroading is going on when you have an opinion or a direction that you'd like to go within the scope of the game that makes logical sense, but that the GM negates or counters with alternatives and drives the story the direction he wants to go. I call it the storyboard railroad. I don't actually tend to like that term. I actually call it a spaghetti western, and I mean in that the concept of a piece of spaghetti. A GM who is trying to drive a story forward by pushing the players, by directing them where to go. It's like trying to push a string of spaghetti. As soon as you put any pressure to make it go in that direction, it's going to twist, it's going to bend, it's going to contort. It's not going where you want it to go. Therefore, the engine, if you will, of the railroad comes into play, where the game master says, no, you don't understand. We are going there, and you're coming with me. And young players, new players, and conciliatory players who just enjoy role-playing all are perfectly, I wouldn't say perfectly, but they are generally more accommodating to this kind of a game master. In other words, if he's doing a great job of telling the story, if he's woven your character's intricacies in well enough that you don't notice the internal pressures that are driving the group's story forward, then the railroad engineer is still a perfect game master. Now notice that a storyboard railroad does seem to align pretty good with the chronicles of the cast, but only if he's sympathetic to the players in the forward direction. In other words, if he's taken that into account when he built the personas in the first place, then the chronicles will make sense because they're going to match up with the what's the term? They talk about the hits, the specific beats. That's what it is. The beats that the storyteller wants to hit. The chronicler game master can line up with the storyboard by aligning the beats in the story to match up with his personal objective of bringing those players online. The next one is the soapbox du jour, and I have to use. I'm a little bit more cynical, I think, towards what are called sandboxes, only because they aren't ever completely truthful. The concept of a sandbox game master, and this is the pure sandbox, is literally I've wound up the clock on the world, and you as the players are going to tell us where the story goes, and it can be on any whim. It doesn't have to be on any objective of a chronicler. It doesn't have to be on any railroad stop. It doesn't have to be any particular module. It's literally what the players want to do. And Travelogue game masters have difficulty with these, but the Monsters of the Month generally don't, and that's because of the concept, and you've probably heard of the concept of the Quantum Ogre. And that is a game master who has gone through the monster manual and has a list of all of the creatures he wants to do, and the order in which he wants to do them, can simply shuffle his index cards when the soapbox du jour goes in a different direction. Okay, I had a monster that was going for the desert, but now instead they want to go by sea, so I'll put the card back that had the dust monster in it, and I'll bring out the card that has the sea monster in it. and therefore we'll still have my monster of the month. We'll still have the dynamic encounter. We'll still have the exciting conclusion, but we won't have the clear guidance of the game master. The reason why I say that soapbox game masters don't really exist is that the very concept of being a storyteller does require a level of organization and regimentation in the materials you have. And if a persona, a first level character in a game says, I want to go punch out the mayor, the game master will let the players do so, but if he's playing true to a sandbox, then the sandbox regimentation should kick in, and that is you went and punched the mayor, so now the local authorities are involved, and you're going to spend some days in the hooskow and have to deal with the downside of being unpopular. And that's not the way most sandbox game masters really deploy their sandbox. They deploy the sandbox from the standpoint of, I've written stuff for every direction, so when you go a certain direction, there's going to be something there. And it's going to be varied enough that it won't look like Monsters of the Month. And yes, if you travel south and you know there's an orc horde down there, then you're going to face the orc horde. And success or failure is all in the hands of the players if they want to be foolish enough to run into that. But if there's any sense of equity or morality in the game master, he's going to change the story. Maybe not significantly, maybe only in perspective, but he's going to change the story, hence the name Sandbox du Jour. Because if the players go a direction that the game master wasn't prepared for, he'll throw something in there. There will be an encounter, there'll be an engagement, there'll be threats made, but more than likely he won't pull the trigger, and this leads to, ironically, almost like a chronicler storyline developing, even if you didn't intend it to be so, because your alpha players, your aggressive players, are going to see that they have the control foothold because you handed it to them by saying sandbox, and therefore they no longer have to worry about whether or not you're going to prevent them from pursuing their own agenda. Now, the last one I mentioned here is Frank Sinatra. And if people know the song I'm referring to, and no, it's not New York, New York, a Frank Sinatra game master would do it my way. And my way is a blur, because the concept of storytelling needs to have somewhat of a, what I call a storyboard time clock, not necessarily railroad. I don't have a set number of agendas. I don't have a set number of locations you have to attend to, but you do have a set number of objectives, and the players choose which objective they're going to pursue, and the ramifications of that will be somewhat targeted based on the cast and where the group is headed internally, to make sure that I hit as many beats of that as I can, while I am also providing them with enough variance in encounters to make the Monster of the Month player happy. And the way my players have described Nykos, the story that I tell, is that it's a sandbox full of quicksand, and the quicksand is the story. And if you tread across it on the way towards some objective, if you're not quick-footed, you'll be lured into looking around at the shiny objects at your feet. And as you look around at the shiny objects near you, you lose sight of the primary objective you were aiming at, and pretty soon your vision has now dropped below the horizon, so you're involved in the local story. And so it feels, well, it is agency. The players have agency to pursue whatever they want to, but it's kind of defined for them in advance that they have a certain series of objectives that need to be accomplished, and slowing down for a specific shiny object won't prevent your course, but it may alter the timeline and whether or not your group actually accomplishes that goal, or another one might. Now, that portion of the Frank Sinatra storyline, that I do it my way for a lot of different groups, is a completely different subject, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But now that we've kind of given an overview of the various types of game masters, we're at the half-hour point, and I think we'll probably have already been to commercial. But if not, realize that you can get these episodes fundamentally commercial-free when you subscribe, because subscription does away with the commercial breaks during the show. And so that's one major reason to subscribe to a channel, because that way you get that material unhindered. All right. So now it goes back to my question. What kind of game master is behind your shield? So now I'm going to take a page from the, I can't remember, I think it's Jeff Foxworthy. I'm going to give you some, you might be a X kind of a storyline. So if you're a game master who doesn't know what you're going to be running next week, but you know that you've got 4 players coming, you might be a serial one-shot. If you have a category listing in your mind of all the possible monsters that exist in the material that you're GMing for, and you've got an idea of what you would like them to engage with next, you might be a Monster of the Month Game Master. If your Game Master literally doesn't start the game until the last player gets there because he's waiting for everybody to be at the station for the next episode, you might be aboard a storyboard railroad. I only give these recommendations or these suggestions because they are ways for you to kind of get a feel for what your storyteller does. And I am not advocating one of these over the others, obviously, other than Frank Sinatra. But that's my pride talking. Having done this for 50 years, my style is very nearly inimitable. I've had people say they were going to run after the fashion of the stories I tell, and I've had the players come back and... But like I said, that's hubris. If you really like single episode stories, serial one-shots is a great way to go. As a matter of fact, our methodology called Role Play Roulette, which, by the way, we are currently running at Board Games Paradise on Saturday afternoons from 2 to 6. Hint, hint. If you want to play a game where you really don't know what you're going to be playing in each week, but you like the idea of telling a story in a single burst, serial one-shots are the way to go. And Role Play Roulette is that here in Redlands at Board Game Paradise, one of our show sponsors. And I say show because some episodes they back and sometimes they don't. But if you have a persona that has a predetermined agenda that you would like to see played through to its fruition, including all of the gee whiz bumps that you got from looking at the 2024 Player's Handbook, you probably are looking for a Chronicles of the Cast Game Master. And if you're a Game Master that does that, make sure that you include all of your players. The hardest part about being a chronicler is being equitable with the number of players you have in a group, because let's be honest, a group that is driven by a single player or even a small group of players tends to get more done. They tend to achieve more objectives. They tend to get more boxes of loot than a group that is disparate and going 17 directions at once. But a good Chroniclers of the Cast Game Master will be able to weave those stories together and make that a really enjoyable experience. So I don't have any one of these that I back in particular. The Travelogue of Modules is highly promotional for all the game's products that are being released week over week, a month over month. So from the standpoint of getting to see a lot of new and innovative stuff and even some old shouts to the past, Travelogue of Modules is a pretty good way to go if you're not building a persona in a chronological fashion. If you're literally doing the one-shots with the same character, but you're swapping out stats and attributes, that's literally playing into the travelogue of modules and not actually pursuing the advancement of a character. Two different things. So you may find yourself dissatisfied with the travelogue of modules if you had that more linear pathway that you were looking for. Linear pathways can come through the chroniclers, through the storyboard railroad. You're not going to find the story advancement as much in a sandbox, but generally everyone will get about the same earned points per session in a sandbox, because how can you judge which was the right decision by the players, since they are the ones that are choosing the course? So, well, we are at 40, so I got 20 minutes. Let's talk a little bit about what kind of game master you could be. If you are a game master and you want to improve your games, the first thing you want to do is be adaptable. You don't want to become a stick in the mud. You don't want to end up being a billboard sign only for one story either. You want to make the pathway as meandering as possible for the players to feel the experience of that advancement. If you are wanting to build a continuity for your adventuring world, you need to also therefore build a compelling story course for your players, and that can be either through storyboarding or chronicling, or even if you're really particularly clever, the travelogue can also do that if you actually plot out and map out which module comes next in terms of persona level requirements for the adventure, class limit requirements for the adventure, and all of that. So if you're able to weave those in advance, then a travelogue can be as good I say linear pathway, but it's only linear from the perspective of the persona who's, you know, laser focused on their objective of advancement and aging and progressing through a story. If, on the other hand, literally you are looking for diversion and perhaps some YOLO / Leroy Jenkins, if you're looking just to push buttons, then the ones I would recommend is find a Monster of the Month Game Master, Sandbox du Jour, and possibly the serial one-shots. Those are really the only ones that cater to the escapist mindset of a player, more so than the others. Finally, if you want to know more about the world that I run, the Frank Sinatra method, do check out our YouTube channel at NycosRPG. There are a ton of videos there that are live streamed sessions from a couple of years ago, back when I was running Dungeons and Dragons directly. And there are going to be some new episodes coming up that will be also live streaming, but we haven't gotten to the point where I can make that announcement yet as far as when. And if you want to know more about the game, NycosRPG, and the actual toolbox that the NycosRPG Master Book is going to represent, check out NycosRPG.com. We are going to be adding, if I haven't already, the Master Book as a PDF version, and that has everything you need to learn how to play and how to teach and how to administer games in the system. It introduces the idea of the community identity sheet that gives you the numeric lore data checkpoints that you'll need to run any given community, with or without SCPs and all of that. We will talk more about the SNPs. We'll talk more about the non-player personas in a future session, and it will be again in the creative differences, because the perspective on what is considered the NPC, what is it, you do the breathing thing, right? The concept of the non-player character needs to be revamped and reconsidered, and the way that NycosRPG addresses it is a rather fresh way, I think, to look at how to handle the non-enjoined personnel in your sessions. And we'll go more into that in a later session. The only thing I haven't mentioned yet is if you really want to be a part of this and join our community, do check out our Patreon account, patreon.com/Nykos. There you can become a part of our community and become capable of playing in our online sessions. We have games on Saturday mornings and Sunday afternoons for our Patreon supporters only. So you gain citizenship in the world of Nykos, you get access to our Discord, and from that access and permission to play in our games on the weekends. We have not yet hit our player cap, and I think you would be surprised at how many players we can accommodate in a session. So we will look into all of that together if you'll join us at patreon.com/Nykos. And if you haven't already, make sure you follow this channel so you're always getting the updates on when this material becomes available. If you're watching on YouTube, remember to like and subscribe, because those things really help us keep this a daily show. We are broadcasting twice a day right now, mornings and evenings, 10 a.m. on Twitch, 11 p.m. on Twitch. Both of those are then rebroadcast onto YouTube shortly thereafter. So if you want to be part of our community, join those things and leave us a comment. Tell us what you think. And hey, while I'm asking, go ahead and put in the comments what kind of a game master is behind your shield. What kind of game master are you? What kind of game masters would you like me to cover that weren't included in this list? I'm looking forward to all of that. Let's make it a great conversation. Until then, I'm Jonathan Alvin, NycosRPG, and thank you again for watching tonight. We'll see you next time.